So welcome everybody. I'm so glad to see your faces here. This is Human Rights in the Digital Age, 4 alums share their stories. And my name is Sharon Friedner. I'm the Associate Director of Spark, which you may have known as the Career Options Resource Center. There is Jeff. Spark stands for Supporting Your Purpose with Action, Resources, and Connections. So new name, we're still getting used to it. So we just had, Jeff just came in. Hi, Jeff, welcome. We're just getting started.
Hi, thanks for having me. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. I was on another call that unfortunately took a couple of minutes too long.
That's okay, we're just happy to see you here. So let me go over the agenda a little bit so you know what we'll be doing. This event is an hour, it's set to end at 1, but if there are extra questions, we'll end the event and some people can stay on and answer questions and continue the conversation for a little bit afterwards. So I will be introducing the panelists momentarily, and then I'll hand it over to Gus, who is the person here who organized the event, whose idea this was, and she will be asking questions and leading us through the rest of the event. We want to leave a good 15 minutes for questions at the end, but you can also type questions into the chat if that is helpful for you. All right, so Gus just popped out. All right, so I'm going to do brief introductions because I don't want to take away from the rest of the event. So I'll just introduce people briefly. So we have Gus Andrews, who, where is Gus? Just, oh, there we go. Gus, are you there? Oh, there you are. Okay. You can't hear? You are on mute. Well, you can see Gus's face. So Gus has a master's and a doctorate degree from Teachers College and Columbia University in Communications Technology and Education. And they are the creator of The Media Show, which is a YouTube series to teach media and digital literacy, as well as the author of Keep Calm and Log On, which is a handbook for online security and privacy. And Gus is currently teaching at Teachers College as well as Adelphi University. And we also have M. Morales, 13F. M, can you wave and say hello? Gus, are you okay?
Hi, everyone.
Finally, I can hear again. I'm just going to chalk this up to the fact that there's entirely too much like hacker power in this room, and we've broken things. So
could be.
It wouldn't be the first time Zoom is broken, but hello, everyone.
Hi, M. So M is a 13F and is a privacy engineer working on Google Photos. And before Google, they were working at Freedom of the Press Foundation, supporting the efforts of SecureDrop. And SecureDrop is a whistleblower tip submission system and actually reported to Edward Snowden, which is an interesting fact. Jeff Deutsch, who just joined us, 07, is the Director of Operations at Mnemonic. Jeff, can you wave? Are you there? Yeah, there you are. And co-founder of the Syrian Archive. Jeff has a doctorate from Humboldt University in Berlin and a master's in public policy from the Hertie School of Governance, and is also a fellow and member of the steering committee at the Center for Internet and Human Rights. And then we have Nick Merrill. Hi, Nick. Nick is the founder of the Calyx Institute, which is a nonprofit organization whose goal is to reform the telecommunications industry with regard to privacy and freedom of expression. And an interesting fact about Nick, that Nick received a demand for information from the FBI and became the first person ever to challenge the constitutionality of some of the national security provisions under the Patriot Act. And that litigation resulted in changing some controversial surveillance provisions. So we'll hear more about that. Really interesting.
Thanks for inviting me.
What did you say?
I said thanks for inviting me.
Oh yeah, it's so great to have you here. So if people want to, I think because of time, we'll just roll ahead. But if people would like to introduce themselves in the chat, just so we see who is here, you can say your name, your pronouns, and whether you're a student or alum. If you want to put in something about what you're studying, and we can just kind of see that on the side as we go along. But with that, I will hand it over to Gus.
All right, y'all. Sharon, I need you to let me share screen again. It's apparently, oh, I think I got kicked out of co-sharing.
Yep. Okay. Let me
Good to see Karen again. I remember Karen from my time there. How you doing? All right, am I good to share screen? Yes, I am. There we go. Great. Okay, cool. Okay, so welcome. My name is Gus. My pronouns are utter chaos. I really am pronoun agnostic and do not care. So we're here to talk to you a little bit about stuff that I think is going to appeal to a lot of Hampshire folks, because for us, it ends up being the intersection between technology a lot of the times and human rights. And when we say human rights, largely the ones we end up talking about are free speech and the right to know. But at the same time, those overlap with a lot of other things. So in the work that we do, sometimes we end up supporting migrant people. Sometimes we end up supporting people who are engaged in civil rights struggles in their countries, a lot of LGBTQI folks. A lot of times abortion activists are very highly represented because these are all people who need the ability to reach out online to people to organize, right, to protest, and to reach out to their communities and build community and engage in self-care as well. That's actually become a really big focus in our community as well. So I'm going to sort of talk a little bit for a second about what that is and how that sort of brings us all together. Quickly, sorry, there we go. Great, so this is one of the articles. I'm going to one of the organizations. I'm going to talk a little bit about in this space. And you'll hear me say in this space a lot, which is just shorthand, because you'll notice that between Jeff and I and Em and Nick, we all are kind of working in really different organizations. So when I refer to the space, I mean all of these organizations. And so it bridges the gap between nonprofit organizations a lot of the time, which are, sometimes related to activist organizations, sometimes are more formal. They're funded and they're able to get grants. And then also it will shade over into the work that Em is doing at Google, for example. So there are people within companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter, places like that, who are also working on digital rights. And there's a lot of times there's a lot of communication between them. I've got Article 19 on the screen right now because they actually refer to in their name the article of the International Declaration of Human Rights that they specifically address, right? So when we're talking about human rights, we may mean any of the ones within there, but specifically, like I said, we're working on free speech, and we may be having conversations across different organizations. We may also have conversations with government, and we may also have organizations with hardware companies. So like Nick is talking about, Nick talks about actual provision of the internet. So companies that give you broadband, companies that provide Wi-Fi, cell phone service, and things like that. So within this space, people will sometimes have jobs that go across these different organizations. So for example, Em went from the NGO, the non-governmental organization, that's another term that I'll use a lot, the NGO, the nonprofits, freedom of the press, to Google. I have gone between various nonprofit organizations, and I worked for a company called ThoughtWorks. I've also worked at other tech companies, and I'll talk a little bit for a while about what I do. So let's see, Sharon, how's that feel to you as like a definition of like what we're talking about, right? So like that's sort of the picture, and I want to sort of we'll all give examples of sort of how we got to where we are. Mine is super weird, and I'll get started on mine just to keep moving. Don't do what I did. My career is a mess, and I frequently don't know how to define it, but I'm going to give you a picture of how I progressed from Hampshire to where I am now. And the interesting thing about that is a lot of time for me, that involves a lot of activist work as well. This is not a known career path. You can't necessarily pull this off, but there may be elements of this, and I will try to highlight which of these elements could be useful to you and how. So Sharon asked me, what internships did you have? And I was like, actually, that didn't matter as much for my career. While I was at Hampshire, I studied social research and I studied journalism. And through that, I came to this interest in media monopoly as something that was sort of controlling what people did and did not actually get a chance to hear and see. At the time when I was there was much more media monopoly in traditional mainstream media. So, I graduated in '99. At the time, we were mostly talking about TV networks and to some extent cable. The internet was quite new at the time. And many of my friends, some of whom actually went to Hampshire, were involved in building the infrastructure of what we now know as, the internet, particularly social media. So this was an organization, Indie Media, that I was involved with. Indie Media was an activist organization that specifically supported the anti-globalization protests of the late 90s and early aughts. The protests that we were having there were to, talk about corporate monopoly power, to talk about the abuses of corporations as they went overseas, of labor, of human rights, and things like that. And these were not issues that were being covered in the mainstream media, so in TV at all, right? So we had a critique of why those media organizations were not doing that, doing that coverage. And instead, Callan Elliott McGray and Evan Henshaw-Plath, both of whom went to Hampshire briefly and then dropped out, were involved in building this website that in the days before Facebook and Twitter was kind of the only way for anybody to post anything. Before this came along and before blogs came along around the same time, anybody who wanted to post anything on the internet needed to actually know how to code. So Indie Media was sort of an easy, quick, fast way to do that. So I was involved in setting up the New York City chapter of Indie Media, and that took me in two different directions, right? So this was just a voluntocracy. I showed up, I did things, and that took me in two different directions. So one of my first jobs in New York City was with the Independent Press Association. How I came to this job was Abby Scher, who was working there at the time, was at Indie Media meetings because she knew that there was like collaborative interest between her organization, which was supporting sort of smaller, non-mainstream news outlets, largely newspapers and magazines, and specifically what we were calling the ethnic press, which is a problematic term, but it's easier than saying there's 270 news outlets run by people from all over the world in New York City. So like News India Times, Banga Patrika, El Diario, and various news organizations like that. And we're going to bring them together and support them in doing things like getting ads, getting press conferences with the mayor and stuff like that. So Abby saw that those of us at Indie Media were sort of aligned, and she knew that I was looking for work. And she said, I've got an entry-level position, come work for me. And she got funding right after 9/11. So the crisis funding involved in 9/11 actually really contributed to my first job because she was suddenly able to hire more people. So that's the kind of thing, that was how my activism to some extent built into what I'm doing now. Further, I also got involved because of where Indie Media was. It was actually sited in the room of a hackerspace, which was run by 2600 magazine, the old hacker magazine. And they also run a conference called the Hackers on Planet Earth conference. I started hanging out as like a random kid at the Hackers on Planet Earth conference, which I recommend. Actually, it's a very good entry-level conference for learning about digital security, because you can just like stroll on up as some random kid, pay the fee and get in the door. Or if you do like I do, start speaking at the conference, give talks at the conference. And yes, you can pitch one right now. And then you get in for free. I've actually never paid to go to Hope. And then I got involved in organizing speakers, like deciding who was going to speak. I also got involved in planning concerts and art there. It is shitty unpaid labor, volunteer labor, but at the same time, that also introduced me to a lot of people who then moved me on through further parts of my career. So somewhere in there, I got a doctorate, Teachers College. Do it, don't do it. I got it because I was looking at a bunch of nonprofits and going, what's the difference between me and all these women who are running these organizations in ways that I don't think are particularly good? They have doctorates. I better go get one. That's not actually how it works. But at the same time, it was kind of useful to have that stamp on my degree and being like, yeah, you did a thing. We know you can do some stuff. And I learned a lot of research methods that I hadn't known at Hampshire. Somewhere in there, I did get an internship kind of at Second Life in one summer. I was doing usability research for them. That becomes useful in a moment because basically at some point, somebody looked at my resume and said, hey, you did usability work at Second Life. hey, I also know you're very involved with the hacker community. You know a little bit about security, you know a little bit about privacy. And also, I assume you're really into the open source community and free software, which was a bad assumption. The guy interviewing me was just a really bad interviewer. And he literally never asked questions at interviews. He just talked to people. But I got the job anyway. So that was in 2003. So that was shortly after Edward Snowden let everybody know that various governments were spying on us. So I got hired at OpenITP to do usability, right? So I was looking at software, how to make software more usable for everyday people, specifically on tools like Tor, like Signal, that are used for people to protect their privacy and security. And this was really the beginning of my career making any kind of sense. So what I was doing at OpenITP was I was literally actually sort of mocking up interfaces and designs. You'll notice that we were actually suggesting that possibly people use Calyx, which Nick will talk about in a second. I was doing data analysis as well, looking at some of the data from the Guardian Project, which is one of the groups developing software to support people around the world in their privacy and security, looking at like which phones people were using and sort of going, we need to support these phones. I think possibly the most important and useful thing I did was developing what we call user personas. And these personas were basically to help the software designers in this space understand who these people were who were going to use their software. So they might be activists, you know, and understand how they were different from them as people. Because honestly, a lot of the time, you know, developers, you know, they're frequently cis white het men, and they don't necessarily know things. And even if they're, say, white gay men, they might not understand that an activist in Russia might have really different needs than they do, or you know, a queer kid coming out in Idaho in a really repressive organization or family where, you know, there was net nanny software and he didn't even know whether to ask whether he was trans, would also have different technological needs. So the user personas that I was using were very much a means of educating developers. And so that's actually a job that's been really important in my career. So gonna try to wrap this up really quickly. It's just hard to explain my career fast. So I'm gonna go nuts and then we're gonna go talk to the other folks. One of the things the Open Internet Tools Project started was the conference that became the Internet Freedom Festival, which is sort of a major gathering place for all of us. I think maybe all four of us. I don't know, Nick, if you've been to IFF, but like we've all been there. And this is how we come together. This is how the space comes together, how we bring together, to some extent, corporate partners, but also NGOs. And we meet and we talk and bring activists together too. A lot of the activists in the world, journalists as well. On the left here is Abir, who's a great friend of ours from the Middle East. And so keep an eye on the IFF. I'll give you information on them later, but they're a great place to begin to find jobs within the internet freedom space, talking about free speech, privacy, security. Misinformation is the new thing I talk about. At some point in here, I'll just note that I wrote a book. And that sort of ended up summarizing a lot of the stuff that I've learned in all of these places and bringing it to a public American audience. So I will stop ranting about myself now. If you want to talk about later, we can do a little bit more. And now let's hear next from Jeff, if that's okay, Jeff. Jeff, talk to us a little bit about how you got from Hampshire to where.
Sure. So I went to Hampshire. I started in fall 2007. And while I was at Hampshire, I should say my Div 3, which I haven't thought about in a very long time, was looking at political economy of prisons in rural upstate New York. So this was doing a lot of like, you know, social science stuff, but also a lot of data analysis. And I had to think, you know, at Hampshire about like, how can you, I mean, all students have to take courses in different disciplines, right? And you have to think about how can you piece things together. And so this is a skill that I think was really useful that I learned at Hampshire and continue to kind of use. When I was at Hampshire, I had a couple of internships. I know Gus has not, but I did. One was with a group called the Rosenberg Fund for Children, based in East Hampton, which is an amazing organization. So I interned there, but then I also worked there for a little bit. And they're a group that gives support to children of U.S. political prisoners, which is an amazing, amazing group. I also was able to do an internship in New York with a group called the Center for Constitutional Rights, which at the time was defending people at Guantanamo, and doing other kinds of work. So one of the things that I was working on when I was there was looking at racial disparities in policing practices and actually building some of this research into some kind of casework that they were doing. Really doing data analysis, right? Looking at numbers, looking at reports, typing things up, and trying to present them. Um, I I also did a study abroad when I was at Hampshire. I did a Hampshire and Berlin program, which I'm not sure if this is still being offered or not, but it was amazing. So I went with maybe 9 other students, and I came to Berlin, uh, took some university courses here at Berlin, and then went back and did my, Div 3. Uh, but that was really great because I moved to Berlin after graduating. I was living in New York for a little bit, doing totally unrelated stuff just to pay the bills, but then moved to Berlin in about 2012, um, to do a master's, and also became involved in the privacy and digital rights community, which has a huge presence in Berlin. I was speaking at different conferences. So Gus mentioned Internet Freedom Festival. There's also Chaos Communication Congress,
Which was where we met,
which is where we
actually. Yeah.
met actually. So I was presenting there on data on race and ethnicity in identifying patterns of discrimination in policing. In Germany, you don't have data on any race or ethnicity, and you haven't since 1945, used for genocide. But also means that there's no discrimination officially on the books, right? So data is a very political thing. I guess like around this time, I was also working with a group called Tactical Technology Collective, doing research. So research on specifically with all of this new technology that's coming out, 2012, 2014, 15 or so, with the shift from indie media to social media, and people putting content online, why are activists, why are human rights defenders not using this technology, specifically in developing countries, right? So we were focusing on Kenya and South Africa with LGBT activists and housing activists. Um, um, this was really like cool. It was a good experience, and I got to learn a lot about privacy texting. Um, and I met a couple of people, a developer and also a trainer, and we started a project called Syrian Archive. And so this was so led by this guy Hadi, a Syrian national who was based in Berlin as well, working to kind of, this is maybe 2012, 2013, 2014, like the Syrian conflict had already started. There's this massive content that's being uploaded to YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, um, but documenting lots of different human rights violations that are happening, but a lot of it is being erased, right? A lot of it is being taken down from different channels or hacked into or things like this. So there's a big intersection between the privacy and digital rights scene and the human rights documentation community. And so I've been with that group since 2014 or so, 2015. And we shifted 2017 to also start looking at different conflicts, like the conflict in Yemen, which also has lots of documentation of human rights violations. In Sudan, where there was a coup and then a transitional government, which is no longer really happening. And also emergency preservation of other types of social media stuff, whether that be Black Lives Matter stuff in the US or stuff going on in Ukraine right now. Um, but yeah, I mean, like something that's been really, really helpful and that I really bring through is the interdisciplinariness of Hampshire. When I did my doctorate, Germany is very fixed in terms of ideas of this is sociology, this is humanities, this is, what have you. And so it was very difficult to find a place where I could bring in data science, technology, and also different types of social sciences. But I think this is something that Hampshire really, really encourages, and that I definitely utilize. So I'll stop there, but I can definitely send links and stuff for all of the projects.
Cool. Next, let's hear from Nick and get just like another completely different perspective on how'd you get from here to there, Nick? Talk about it.
Sure. Thanks, Gus. It's funny hearing your story, Gus, because there's like a few threads that overlap. Indie media, I was involved with quite a bit, and 2600 magazine, the hacker magazine out of New York. I started going to their monthly meetups when I was, I think, a freshman in high school. I was like 14. And that really opened my eyes to a whole world of curiosity and curious people that love to just understand how everything works. I guess I had felt that desire too, but I needed to find a community of people, of mentors, to sort of show me the way. I was at Hampshire starting in the fall of 1990, and I didn't finish. I'm not, I guess, much of an academic. I tried to finish college, but eventually I gave up because it didn't make sense after a while, because I had started a company, and it was one of the first internet service providers in New York City. And I think I've been running it 2, 3, 4 years, and I was still struggling to try to finish my university degree, going part-time to the New School or Hunter College or all these different schools in New York City. And eventually I was like, well, why am I doing this? I'm employed, I have experience, and nobody in the field that I was in really cared if you had a degree or not. So eventually I just kind of let it go. But the concept of the sunk cost theory, like I kept thinking, oh, I've spent 6 years trying to get a degree, maybe I should finish it and then the time won't be wasted. But I think the way I look at it now is, regardless, the time was not wasted. At Hampshire, I had an advisor named Al Woodhull, who I looked up, and I don't think he's with the college anymore. But he was a really smart, interesting political computer science teacher, and he sent me off on a few different intellectual directions of things to look into. And so, unfortunately, I didn't spend that much time there. Pretty soon I was back in New York, and as I mentioned, I started this internet service provider, but I was already very politically minded. And so I really was trying to think about different ways to change the world using this amazing new technology, the internet, which really only became kind of generally available like in the early 90s, 93, 94. I started this company around 94, 95, and I ended up hosting the websites for a lot of different small activist organizations, things like the Committee to Support the Revolution in Peru, or an organization that I don't think exists anymore called Refuse and Resist, and Democracy Now, the radio show. We hosted their website and all their streaming stuff. And, as luck would have it, one of the other ones that I was involved with was the New York Civil Liberties Union, which is the New York branch of the ACLU. We hosted their website as well. So I had been involved in this for a while. I was really running a company, and in theory, the point of it was to make money, but mostly it was just sort of like an excuse for me to do all this work with activist organizations, and that's what really made me happy. I also had clients that were for profit. The big clients were two big advertising agencies from New York City, and they would send their clients to my company, and we would host the websites for companies that I didn't even really like that much, Mitsubishi Motors and IKEA and things like that. But that paid the bills, and that allowed me to do all this pro bono work with all these activists. So as far as I was concerned, it was sort of like, I felt like it was like a Robin Hood kind of a thing, taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor, and sort of diverting that money towards causes that I wanted to support. About 10 years into it, though, I got, 9/11 happened. I was in Lower Manhattan. 9/11 happened, and then within a couple of years, the FBI came after me and wanted me. They sent an agent to my office, and they wanted me to hand over all this data on one of the clients, and it wasn't with a warrant or a search order or anything like that. Usually these things come from a court. Instead, it was just an FBI agent that gave me a letter and said, you have to do this and you can't tell anyone that we've approached you. And I feel really lucky that I was already working with NYCLU. So I called them up and I said, hey, we've got this weird thing called the National Security Letter, and what is this all about? And they called me down to their office, and I didn't know at that time that it was going to be like this, but it ended up taking 12 years. We filed a lawsuit against the FBI and the Department of Justice, and it became a whole long saga. And the short version of what happened is that it changed the law, and it raised awareness of what was going on, that there was basically mass spying on a lot of people in the country without warrants and in violation of the Constitution. And it set me off on this whole other direction, which is that I wanted to work in the nonprofit space, and working in the for-profit space wasn't as interesting for me anymore. And I kind of thought that, internet service providers and mobile phone providers and telephone companies had and have a moral obligation to protect the rights of their clients, because especially in the context of internet providers, it can be so revealing about what a person is thinking, or who they're working with, or who they're talking to. And it seemed to me that if you're working in this communications provider space, in a way, it's sort of like as if you're someone's like psychiatrist or something. It's like you're a confidant and you have all this really private information. And so you have this obligation to really think carefully about what kind of records you keep and how long you keep them and how you treat the information, and under what circumstances you would hand it over if you were forced to. So I started doing this work, which really is about reimagining how telecommunications could work if you were thinking about it with privacy in mind from the beginning, which it wasn't done. There were sort of like afterthought attempts to try to make telecommunications a little bit more private here and there, but they're all just kind of band-aids. So I started this nonprofit, the Calyx Institute, in 2010. And now it is, 12 years later? 13, 12 years? I don't know. It's been quite a while. We're based theoretically in Brooklyn, New York. We have an office in Brooklyn, New York, but I've recently moved up to Massachusetts. So I'm in Arlington, Massachusetts now. And so I'm kind of not that far from Hampshire. It looks like I'll be putting down some roots here. I think that's the basis of the story. And I don't know if I hit all the notes or if there's anything else I should cover, but we can come back and talk about more things.
Yeah, I think we can come back in discussion. Em, go ahead and tell us. You are sort of coming in a little bit later than some of us here. So what path have you followed in the wake?
Hopefully everyone can hear me. Had a bit of computer trouble. Great, brilliant. See, even people that work at Google have video conferencing troubles. Trust me, it's normal. Hi, so my name is Em, and I use they, them, or he, him pronouns. I'm a little bit chaotic with pronouns too, like Gus, but I do use those too. But I mean, if you use others, I would be like, I'm open to the idea. That's not an endorsement for everyone else, obviously, but like I'm sure all of you Hampshire folks know now. But yeah, so I will set a timer because full disclosure, I happen to have ADHD. not telling everyone to reveal their own things, but if anyone has ADHD, there is hope for you. And so that's why I figured I'd come out with that. But yeah, so I'll start a little bit before Hampshire, just a little bit. But basically, before Hampshire, I was a community college student. So I'm a transfer student. So my start date at 13F was actually a transfer start date. A lot of transfers seem to have the S for spring instead of F, but I came in at the beginning of an academic year. So I'm actually from Western Massachusetts. I grew up in Holyoke nearby and was born in Springfield. So yeah, it's wonderful. I love that area. It can be boring sometimes, but boring in the most beautiful way. I can say that I'm from there. So I hope to come back soon for vacation. But yeah, so my interest in technology was that I grew up fairly poor, and we didn't have money to afford something like Microsoft Office back in the day when there was no Google Docs, that barely existed. I think was called Writely back then. So the fact that it even existed was impressive. Now we just take it for granted. We do video chats and have 16 people or actually I've been in video chats with 120 people and 50 of them are on a single Google Doc, in a symphony writing together. It's amazing, but that didn't exist back then. And so I was like Googling what's a free version of Office, and I found something called Open Office, now known as LibreOffice. It's free and it's wonderful. And I got excited by the free and open source software community. And I was like, why are people making stuff for free? Like, what is this? And this is me as a 14-year-old at the time. And so, naturally, because I was a 14-year-old with a lot of time and ADHD and Wikipedia was a thing, and I discovered that, and I was like, wow, why are people doing all this yeah, it's a good question, guys. Why did people do this sort of thing for free? And I realized there was like this, it's not just free of cost, but like there's free speech issues, there's collaboration, there's even more deeper problems that I came to realize that came about, like how technology impacts people around the world. It impacted me in a positive way, being poor and imagining a world outside of my small town in Western Massachusetts and the cool things I can do. I went to community college because I didn't know what to do, and it was free for me because Massachusetts actually, unless it's changed the past few years, generally invests very well in its community colleges. And if you're under a certain income, it's pretty progressive for a U.S. state. California is also pretty good in this way too, but like not many states have invested in their community colleges, so we're very fortunate to have that in Massachusetts. But I studied mathematics because I couldn't find anything better to do. And then I told people what I wanted to do. And they said, have you considered transferring to this weird college up in Amherst? And I said, so not UMass or Amherst College, but Hampshire College. It's like, oh yes, I've heard of that. That's the weird school where all the weird things happen. And I realized, actually, yeah, I should go there. I did a tour and some lovely alums from the area showed me around, and I applied and didn't think I would get in, and I got in, and I was like, wow, holy crap, I feel so blessed. And I could study what I want to study and make it work. And what I ended up studying was my concentration, my Div 2 concentration was basically called the intersection of civil liberties and technology. And that was basically my Div 3 title, if I remember correctly, was the title was kind of ripped off from this famous author, science fiction author on the internet, Cory Doctorow, who is in our spaces tangentially as well. He writes some excellent books, and he wrote a really lovely, really wonderful essay called "The Coming War on General Purpose Computation." And so I ended up calling my Div 3 something along those lines, and it was an interesting time, but I can explain that. That's a whole other talk on its own. So in the interest of time, I'll move on to, I happen to do internships. So when I transferred, I was 21, so I'm a little bit non-traditional in that sense, like a couple years behind. And being a person of color, in my case, I'm not the biggest fan of this, but for better or for worse, at this current time, even now, the way you can get ahead in a lot of careers is who you know and networking. And it's a natural tendency of human beings. We tend to like people we know, and be like, hey, come along. I do this too. But it's a little harder for certain groups, certain marginalized groups, to get in, because not because of any specific explicit intent of for example, a white cis dude or whatever, but like rather unintentionally, the networks are a little bit more closed in many environments. Yeah, I wish it wasn't the case either. Thanks, Gus, for mentioning that. So, but especially if for everyone, even if you are the stereotypical white cis het dude, or a person with some amount of marginalization in some form of intersectionality, networking is extremely useful, and going to conferences was very helpful for me, and also internships. So that's not required. We saw one that didn't have an internship, but they're very helpful, and I recommend you apply early. It's a little bit, I think now is the right time if you haven't started already, pushing it, so get moving. But applying for grants, Hampshire had several grants that I used to apply for a nonprofit internship. For better or for worse, some nonprofits don't pay interns, so you're going to need a grant for that. Please don't. Yeah, I know. Please don't use credit cards like I did. I also did that too. I was very creative with finances, let's put it that way. But anyway, I interned at the Software Freedom Law Center, softwarefreedom.org. And this was a really interesting nonprofit. For a while, I wanted to be a lawyer working in the software freedom open source space. It's a little bit inside baseball, but software has licenses, and these licenses, some of them are open source licenses that help protect users of the software and protect developers. So later I interned at another related internship called Software Freedom Conservancy. I love that title because it makes me think of a garden. It's not quite that, but they do help many free and open source software projects grow, keep them together, and it's a lovely place and with amazing people. But another thing that helped me a bit was going to conferences. I went to a free and open source software conference in Cambridge called LibrePlanet, and again, being in poverty, I never even really been to Boston. If you live in Western Mass, you know that Boston's not a huge drive. You go on the Pike for about 90 minutes, and well, 90 minutes if you drive fast, 2 hours if you want to drive legally. But for me, I barely left Western Mass. And so taking a Greyhound bus, exploring a big city for the first time, very nice. And it exposed me to a lot of things. And just getting to know people that were in my space. I just got so excited. I wasn't the best at networking the first time I went, but it's a skill you build up and you get better at. The people at Spark, it used to be called Quark. I believe it's now called Spark, but they can help you with that. Don't be shy. If you're worried about being awkward in our spaces, don't worry. You probably wouldn't be the only awkward person, and we kind of see that as a virtue. So, and if you're not awkward, that's fine for you too. But yeah, anyway, I spent a little bit of time on that, but I'll move on very quickly. So in terms of what's helping me network, one of my friends graduated Hampshire a year ahead of me, and we were in the same kind of space in terms of free and open source software and internet freedom. They moved to California to join a nonprofit called Freedom of the Press Foundation. I'm going to refer to it as FPF, but it's Freedom of the Press Foundation, freedom.press. And they're a really cool organization. When I joined, it was like 5 people. Now it's like 20 or 30 people. But they were working as a software engineer on SecureDrop. And SecureDrop is an open source whistleblower tip submission place, securedrop.org. It's really great it's trying to replicate sort of the secretive mailbox at the end of the street on the internet. It's hard to be anonymous on the internet. This tries to help with that. You can give, if you have some dirt on someone that it's like really important to share to a journalist. New York Times, The Guardian, BBC, Washington Post, many other news organizations use it, and it's really wonderful. But yeah, my friend, they heard that Edward Snowden needed an assistant. And so I was traveling around the country. I was homeless between semesters at Hampshire. So I got really good at being in a backpack with my laptop, being a bit of a nomad, a little like, I don't know if monk's the right word, but it felt like being a internet freedom kind of monk a bit, living a basic lifestyle on my laptop, on my backpack, traveling the world. And I managed to be in San Francisco for the first time in my life around the same time. So I did an interview with Freedom of the Press Foundation during the last winter of my time at Hampshire. And a month later, I went to New York City to meet with Ben Weisner, the head of privacy at the ACLU, the national office. And I got the job. Went from making minimum wage at the Bridge Cafe, or actually a little above minimum wage, but a little underpaid, and to making 30 an hour, which was like incredible, living in Western Mass. And when I met my committee, I said, hey, I'm sorry about my, I'm late for my div, like our check-in, I didn't meet, I had to meet, work with Ed and stuff. And they're like, Emmanuel, come on, you won, just finish, it's okay, whatever. You got a job, finish. And I did, and moved to San Francisco, worked there for a few years. And I actually, that comes up to the other part. For going to conferences and traveling, if you do end up working at a place that has a conference budget or travel budget, be judicious or not judicious, actually, take advantage of it if you can. Because if you don't need to pay to go somewhere, then don't pay. You provide a value just by being there to an organization, and I did. What helped me get into some conferences was I would be in a booth volunteering. For some conferences, that's just enough for being there a day for free or 2 days. Being a speaker is really great. It scared the heck out of me the first time I did that at LibrePlanet, which is a relatively small conference, but you start at small conferences, or even in your class at Hampshire, or running a club or something. And then, or maybe groups that are in the 5 colleges, and then you can move up from there. People generally have an interest in you doing well. And if they know that you're a new speaker, that's fine. They're even more interested in your success. Don't apologize for being there. But I actually met Gus, I believe I met you at Hope. So, and I known about Nick Merrill from other people, but I met him, I believe, the first time at Hope in person too. So anyway, that really helped. I met someone there that toward the end of my time at Freedom of the Press Foundation, they ended up referring me to Google as a privacy engineer. And that was kind of a 180, moving from nonprofit to industry. But that's essentially how I got to being a privacy engineer at Google. I've been at this for 12 minutes, so I'll wrap up briefly again. But lastly, as a privacy engineer, I work to ensure that our over 1 billion users of Google Photos, and there are over 4 trillion photos and videos as it currently stands as of like last quarter, are protected and safe. There's a bit of government regulation types of things and a bit of other kind of stuff. Oh, nice. I see someone born in Holyoke and raised. Oh, amazing. But yeah, it's not the most exciting work sometimes. It's not very activisty, it's more industry. But it really shows that even if your work doesn't seem as exciting, it's not a TV show. You're not fighting crime, it's not 24, you're not like, it's not a constant excitement. The dishes have to get done and things have to get done, and but you still participate in this community, and I may end up moving to it. My journey is still relatively new. So it's a kind of a really random, weird journey that's not exactly replicable, but it's a reminder that if your journey is kind of weird, you're not the first one, you're not the only one, and you won't be the last one. And I'll leave it there for questions and the rest. So thank you for letting me talk.
Yeah, sorry, I realized I totally screwed up this panel. This should have been probably four talks, because like all of us have the weirdest careers and have so many different things that we've done that are related to it. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again and just put this screen full of resources up so that we have it in front of us. But yeah, please, everybody start asking questions. We want to talk with you. I think most of us ready to go a little bit over as needed, but we know some folks also need to leave. We are sorry to miss you. Here are some links. I can chuck more of these in channel, but yes, pose us questions.
So in terms of questions, I just want to jump in here. When the screen sharing is on, it's hard to see people. So
oh, okay, I will go ahead and turn it back off. Well, actually, you know what I'll do is I'll just copy that list and dump them in channel.
That would be great. And then we could even, if you send that to me, Gus, we could email that to people afterwards. We can put it in the like a thank you email to people afterwards. Um, all right, and so people can type questions in the chat. It's also nice during the questions. I know some of you are not showing your video, but if people feel comfortable to put the video on, sometimes it's nice to see faces. But we'll wait because I know sometimes it takes a little while to formulate a question. So you can think about
I'm
it.
so glad to see Herb. Herb was my NSD1 chair. Hi, Herb. OG, interdisciplinary scholar, applied
Hey, Herb is
science.
here.
Dude, yeah, Herb's here. Herb showed up. Hi, Herb.
Hey.
Herb loves Herb.
So I do just want to point out one thing we've been kind of talking and joking about of the terminology of this space.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what that meant, but now I feel like I have a little bit of a better idea. And what strikes me for folks who are, you know, here, we can't see you, but if this is something you're thinking about going into, there's such a wide range of possibilities, but we have these wonderful alums who are there in the space. And, you know, there's just so many different entry points and welcome. And it's really a community, that there's a connected community of people.
Yeah, and I mean, like we've all sort of highlighted how, you know, to some extent, just like less formal meetings, like conferences are huge. This is where I see all these folks. Like we get together at conferences, we hang out, we exchange notes on like who's hiring, you know, what new work is being done, where something needs to be fixed, stuff like that. So conferences are big. Yeah, and that's sort of like, and that's what glues this together. I mean, to some extent, you know, like we've got Nick is a hardware and networks guy. Jeff is like, not to like limit anybody to like what they do, because like how the hell do I do puppets and also education and human digital security? Fuck no. Jeff has done a lot of stuff with data and you know, getting data in one place and sharing it, but then also really strongly on a lot of, you know, rights that aren't necessarily digital over time. And then M has been really based in the free software community over time. Free software community, I want to continue to say, like, it's so easy to step into the free software community. It is a voluntocracy. Voluntocracies work for Hampshire students. We know how to get in and get things done. You can go in, you can do things. If you have been involved, as has Ida, hi Ida, how you doing? If you've been involved with student government and stuff at Hampshire, you know that voluntocracies also really suck, because the person who steps in and gets the work done has to do too much stuff and then frequently burns out, and that happens a lot. But yeah, actually, Gabby asked, what's the most important thing on the horizon? In my community, actually, burnout. We are in, like, people I didn't think were going to burn out are burning out this year. When you are you're dealing with human rights, and Ukraine's on fire and Myanmar's on fire and everybody's on fire. You know, and one thing I really noticed between my nonprofit organizations and the for-profit ones, it was a breath of fresh air to go work in the corporate world at ThoughtWorks. And they're like, we can organize our work and plan it and determine what we're gonna do and what we're not gonna do, which the nonprofits don't do. And I would kind of like to bring that to them, because otherwise, some of my favorite people, like some friends of Internews, which is a big organization in this space that supports journalists, are burning the ever-living hell out. We also, I want to give another shout out to the Internet Freedom Festival, who have, the organizers there have dealt with some really severe abuse. Like there were some abusers in our community. That has taken a 180, and it's now run largely by women of color and queer folks who are really, really concerned with making sure that we're taking care of our mental health. And it has been a lifesaver. Like, we would, all of us, be significantly more burnt out and possibly not even here right now. So that's been a lovely development in that space. What do we do to prepare for cyber attacks from Russia? For me, as somebody who's working on misinformation and media literacy, number one thing, look for messages that are trying to freak you out. Pause, be mindful, don't spread them. That includes in your inbox. There's a lot of phishing attempts happening right now. Those will also try to freak you out. Don't respond. That is, believe it or not, like, it sounds like it's low tech, but that's really important. Improve your security. Set up a password manager. The password manager will make it so you're not reusing passwords. That is mission critical right now, because cyber warfare is absolutely a field on which Putin is really strong, and he is doing what he can to sow discord, and he's doing what he can to exploit our software vulnerabilities. Anybody else want to weigh in on this one?
Yeah,
Jeff.
maybe I'll go. I mean, so we do open source investigations, which I think has intersections a lot with what many people are doing, including what Emma's doing at Google, because we deal with content on platforms. And, you know, we have archived millions of records, but basically going through and doing verification of these pieces of content, this audiovisual content, and trying to say like what actually happened at a particular date and time. You know, making sure that you have like um, multiple sources, you know, for pieces of content at multiple times from multiple angles. All of our methods and everything are on our site. You're more than welcome to check them out. But a lot of the skills within the open source investigative community, which are also built on free and open source software, and sharing of methods, sharing of content, you know, and free code, right? So cheap, free, accessible code that people can expect, you know, if you know want to. So I think there's different types of like attacks. You know, as Gus was saying, you know, there could be like hacks or things like this. Honestly, everyday people are probably not going to be facing this to a large extent, but misinformation and disinformation much more so. Look into ways of doing media verification. You know, we have some resources on this, but there's many others, and I'm happy to send them along after. Bellingcat, as Gus just mentioned, is a partner that we've been working with for many years. I mean, we've been looking at Syria, but also, I mean, with Ukraine, you have Syria, you know, Russian government, Russian forces involved in both. The same tactics that have been used in countries in Middle East, North Africa for a decade are now being used, I think, in the West. You know, so this isn't new stuff, and this is things that many people have dealt with before. There's a lot of resources that are out.
So just because of time, I want to just take a moment to sort of officially wrap up and then stay on for informal chat and conversation. So just thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, panelists. You are incredible, and the work you're doing is so important. And so I think for those of us who are not in the space, I don't think it's something I ever think about. If I thought about it more, I think I would appreciate it a lot. So thank you for doing that work. I want to tell everybody about another alumni panel that we have coming up tomorrow. It is at 7 p.m. I put it in the chat a couple times, but I'll put it there again. It's called Getting Paid to Write, 3 Alums, 3 Paths. And it's about how to make a living in communications and other writing related fields. So that should be a really excellent event. And just thank you again for coming. And I will stop the recording now, and people who want to stay on, you can turn your video on and we can just have an informal chat time.
Cool.
Go ahead.
So we just heard from Jeff, who was saying that Mnemonic is actually will take Hampshire interns, which was cool. And then Nick, you got a grants program going on. Talk about Calyx's grants.
Yeah, we have what we call micro grants. Basically, they're mostly in the range of like $10,000 and below. We welcome people who want to launch a project, have an idea, want to prototype it, to apply. And the concept is kind of born from mine and others' sort of bad experiences with the grant process with some grant givers, where the overhead of applying the application process and the reporting process can be really burdensome. So we tried to super simplify it, where you can apply with 1 page, and at the end you write a 1-page report. And it seems like practically anyone can do that. The downside is the grants are not huge, so it's not like you can work for 5 years on $10,000 or less, or maybe you can if you're really amazing. Maybe
and then I mean, like, you know, then there's the overhead of like, and I have to apply for a bunch of micro grants, which I've also had that challenge as well. But we, you know, like for many organizations, it really helps, particularly if you've got like an infrastructure thing where you can't get another funder to fund it, you know, because they're like, we don't want to pay for your continuity. And so that's where Nick comes in.
Right. And the nice thing is then you can go to another funder and be like, look, we've already been funded. So there's some vote of confidence there. And we've helped a whole bunch of projects sort of get off the ground with that little free software things, and actually some statistical studies and a lot of interesting stuff. You can read about it on our website at calixinstitute.org.
And I totally want to apply. There's a video I've been wanting to make about how the internet works, which I still have not managed to do. But Gabby had a question for M. So Gabby, do you want to fire away?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you're aware, but we're moving more and more. Hampshire is moving more and more to a Google environment. We're about to add on Google Mail and Google Calendar, which has been a huge step for us. There are still internal concerns about the security and ownership of information inside of a Google education domain versus a public personal domain. It would be lovely at some point if maybe you come and work with our Media and Technology Learning Collaborative and discuss that with us at greater length. I think it would alleviate a lot of fears on the campus, but we're moving in that direction.
Yeah, sorry, Em, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't lag.
No, the question was for you. I shouldn't have jumped in. Go ahead.
Okay, you can jump in after, actually, because I was going to say, I'm happy to talk more about some of the more specific details about, using Google Workspace. I guess I'm becoming a little bit of a salesperson here, but I'm happy to talk about it. I'm sure Sharon can send you my email, or someone can. If not, I'm happy to just type in the chat too. But I'm happy to set some time to buy her.
That would go a long way for somebody on the inside that's also a Hampshire alum.
Okay, yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk. But Gus, I think you had more.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of note, like, generally, I like. My sense of the space, and like, I don't know how objectively any of us can address this, but my sense is that for the purposes of academic stuff, security-wise, Google is not so much a concern, but people might wonder about privacy. Actually, I think a little bit more, and just to be clear about the differences between the two is always a good idea. But yeah, glad you can make that connection. So for sure.
I just put my email in the chat, so Sharon kind of reminded me, like, hey, you can put it in the chat. I'm like, oh yes, there's a chat. So there's my email. If you need to reach out, it's my personal email. But yeah.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the Technology and Learning Collaborative.
So the college is organized around 4 learning collaboratives now. Are you all aware of that? So Media and Technology is one of them. Our big hairy question for next year is what is truth in a post-truth world?
Wait, that's what I want to be working on right now. Let's talk.
Okay. I'm intrigued by that.
Yeah, and I actually
that the Media and Technology Learning Collaborative has looked at over the last year and a half or so is, has technology connected us or isolated us? And during the pandemic, that was a wonderful piece to look at. So yes, I would love to connect more. I was so glad to see this panel. It's been really wonderful. Thanks.
Yeah, glad you're here. That's fantastic. Yeah, it's interesting. I've been trying to get people to reframe it because truth is a big challenge. But for me as a social researcher, trust is easier, right? Because like people trust things that aren't true, So yeah, I've got all sorts of theory and crap that I can apply and plug this into other parts of Hampshire research, plug into a little bit Herb and the science and technology studies stuff, plug into a little bit to like anthropology, sociology, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I can help you make those connections. I'm having fun with that stuff right now.
Great.
Ida, glad you're still here. I know Ida's probably on mute, so Ida's finishing up her Div 3 is my understanding. Ida has been setting the world ablaze and is, I think, currently editing the Omen. And I won't say anything more, but because Ida can speak for herself, but I'm just glad to see Ida here. So
I just want to say thank you, Gus, for suggesting this. For those of you who don't know, Gus has been trying for years to get us to do this panel. And we finally were able to have time for it, which I'm so grateful for. And Gabby, I'm so glad you're here because I feel like you can now take the torch with Gus and the wonderful alums, and you're all just incredible resources for Hampshire. And so I'm glad that we're here and reconnecting.
Yeah, I want to make sure that we keep going. I know M mentioned somebody else who was at Hampshire who was a little bit before them, who was doing free software stuff. I don't even know who that was.
Do you know Psy?
Spelled
You may have
PSY?
met them. PSI.
PSI. I'm not sure, the handle rings a bell.
Okay.
But then, yeah, and like I said, Evan Kellen, Glyph Lefkowitz also, who does Python programming, is like, he's not directly in the space, but he's just excellent. He's a really good person. So yeah, there's a ton of us out here doing this work, and I do want to make sure that we keep connecting, because I think there's so much room. Like, I would rather have Hampshire students in here asking questions, pushing boundaries, insisting on justice, than a lot of the people who come wandering in. Like, I don't want to hear from anybody else talking about NFTs, for example. But yeah, I mean, like, it would be great to continue to forge these connections, because, you know, we see pathways, and, you know, I do see a lot of jobs come up. The link that I put in for the Internet Freedom Festival jobs board, that's a good board. Like, there's a lot of good stuff. There's certainly entry-level positions that'll be coming in there that I think would be really great for recent graduates, for, you know, undergrads, interns, stuff like that. So yeah.
I feel like next year is a particularly exciting year because we'll finally have more students and 2 really big, robust and new classes. So it's a really great opportunity to just to meet them, to meet new people, and to kind of infuse the idea that alums are out there and waiting to welcome you into your world. And there are jobs, and there's something to do there.
Yeah.
And it's important work that's needed and takes skills, and it's really great for students to start thinking about it right when they start at Hampshire. So.
And I'll say, like, Gabby or whoever, like, I would be up to do a Jan term probably. Like, for the moment, my schedule is flexible enough that I would totally come up and just like hang out and talk about this stuff. So yeah.
That would be really nice. And is the alumni divided in ways that there are groups of folks in the tech space? I mean, except you've all gotten together because you've all met up, but
yeah,
is there a way that we can cultivate?
I mean, this is something that actually Ida and I have been talking about too, is it is actually hard as alums to make contact, or it has been for me, certainly. Like, I know Sharon has been swamped. You know, there have been channels and things like that, but it's not always clear. And I'm not sure how to reach out to students, particularly, like, oh, it takes amazing and like unnecessarily difficult initiative from students like Ida being like, hi, like, you know, we know you're there. We'd like to talk to you. And it shouldn't be on them. Like, they've got a lot of work to do. So I don't know how to make it better. Like, I've been involved a little bit with some, you know, like, around the time that things nearly melted down at the school, I was involved in the alum stuff here in Brooklyn, but it's not always easy. I feel like, so I do a lot of thinking about Jean Lave and Etienne Wenger's communities of practice and legitimate peripheral participation. I don't know if those are models you're familiar with, but this idea of apprenticeships, right? Like, as a way to do this. And we've all talked a little bit about conferences. Conferences can be a way to apprentice, you know, activist movements can be a way to apprentice. And I would love to see, you know, maybe formalizing that a little bit more within Hampshire to just make the stepping stone a little bit easier. So maybe we're exposed to students earlier on without them even necessarily having to have an internship, building it into the curriculum somehow. Like, I'd have thoughts around that, but I just don't know how to make that happen.
So I put my email in there. If the 4 of you want to be in contact with me, I think I'm staying on as the staff facilitator of media and technology, and I would love to continue this collaboration. I'm a good people connector, and hooking up current students with all of you in this space would be awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to do it.
Cool, thanks, Gabby.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, everybody. Thank you, Gus, for organizing this. And we will meet again, hopefully.
Yeah, thanks, Gus.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for helping us pull this together.
Nice to meet you, Sharon.
Nice to meet you too.
It's been an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been an absolute honor talking with y'all. Bye, Jeff. Bye, Nick. Bye, Em. Good to see you all.
Bye.
See you around. See you on the internet.
Thank you.